Hey guys, we're going to get to the show in just a second, but I'd like to take a moment to give a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, and that's Podcorn. So, what is Podcorn? If you're looking to do a podcast and you want to monetize it and you want a really simple way to do it, then Podcorn is the answer. And I've been using Podcorn now for several weeks, actually months, and it has been one of the simplest ways to get a sponsor for your podcast. It's extremely easy to use. There are dozens and dozens of opportunities, and it has really helped out my show because prior to coming across Podcorn, it's not easy, right? It's kind of confusing. There's not a very simple way to go and find a sponsor for your show. And Podcorn takes all of the thinking out of it, all of that hard work, and it simplifies the experience and simplifies the process because you just go in and you're able to find what you want, find a sponsor that matches with your audience, submit a proposal, and boom. It's very easy to do. It's podcorn.com. So it's really just a marketplace to connect podcasters to an amazing opportunity. I mean, you can do ads such as reads, interview segments, topical discussions, a ton more, and there's no middleman. So you set your own rates and then you work with the brand to come up with a plan, and it is extremely easy to use. So you never give up any rights to your podcast, by the way, and they're just there to support you every step of the way. And trust me, this has been my experience with Podcorn. So check them out. I put a link to them in this episode's show notes. So check out podcorn.com today. Hey everybody, welcome to the WWE podcast. We're going to get everything rolling in just a minute, but I'm really excited for today's show. It's Wrestling Nostalgia Night, and I've got a guest, Anthony DeMarco, who is joining me to discuss on a high level, the Taboo Tuesday and Cyber Sunday pay-per-views that occurred between 2004 and 2008. We dove into the culture of WWE as far as who were the stars at that time. What kind of transition was WWE in? It was the Ruthless Aggression era, but who were the stars that were emerging during that time? And look ahead to, could WWE implement a pay-per-view like this in 2020? We make a case for it. So this is a really fun show. We also, at the back end of the show, discuss the current product, how excited we are for Bobby Lashley getting this opportunity at Backlash, and if there's more to come for Lashley, and spoiler alert, we really hope that there is. And we talk about the greatest wrestling match ever. I know you guys have heard me rant about this, but I did want Anthony's take on it, so we cover that and just so much more stuff, guys. You know how these shows go, so we're going to get everything started right after this. Hey WWE fans, I'm assuming that a ton of you guys out there love jerky. If you do, you have to check out bulkbeefjerky.com. That's bulkbeefjerky.com. These guys reached out to me and gave me a coupon code for you guys, 20% off. So what's that coupon code? WWE. Pretty darn simple, right? So for 20% off, you just have to apply the WWE code. If you love beef jerky, you gotta go to bulkbeefjerky.com. They have the softest, all-natural brisket jerky you will ever try, and over 5,000 5-star reviews. If you don't like it, they will refund you. But head on over to bulkbeefjerky.com and use the code WWE for 20% off your order. With 5,000 plus 5-star reviews, you really can't go wrong. So again, head on over to bulkbeefjerky.com and use the code WWE and you'll get 20% off your order.
It's time for your weekly fix of wrestling nostalgia when we look at wrestling's past eras, from the Attitude Era to the Reality Era.
I'd like to think that maybe this company will be better after Vince McMahon's dead, but the fact is, it's going to get taken over by his idiotic daughter and his doofus son-in-law and the rest of his stupid family.
To today, here on the WWE Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. It's Wrestling Nostalgia Night. One of my favorite nights of the week. I know many of you love the nostalgia shows too, and tonight I don't think will be an exception, because I've got Anthony DeMarco with me to cover pay-per-views that I don't ever think I've even mentioned on this show before. and that's Taboo Tuesday and Cyber Sunday. And if you guys don't remember, or if you're new to those pay-per-view names, what they basically were pay-per-views that fans were allowed to vote on the matches that they wanted, the stipulations that they wanted for a particular match. You didn't have free reign on who you wanted to match with who. Of course, it was a pre-selected pool of candidates. In other words, Triple H would have to defend his World Heavyweight Championship against A, JBL, B, Batista, C, Shawn Michaels, right? I mean, it was to that effect. So they always had a pre-selected pool of candidates, but it was a blast, and I remember that, and logging on to WWE.com and voting like crazy and all that kind of thing. So Anthony and I discuss the pay-per-views conceptually. We look at the current WWE product at the time. Who are the stars? Who are the emerging stars, as I mentioned in the open of the show? And look ahead to, could this be something that WWE implements in the future? Could they bring this back? Could this concept be resurrected? We look into that as well. It was a really great conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll get to it in just a moment. But first, I'd like to welcome you guys to the show. This is a show that is done 7 times a week, sometimes more. Tomorrow will be AEW and NXT, respectively, the reviews for those 2 shows. And then Saturday will be our brand new hosts for the SmackDown review, which I know you guys are loving. I've got some great feedback, and with Jeff and Brian on that particular topic for SmackDown, and that drops on Saturday. So it's just a great cast and crew that I have here, and I'm very lucky to have such knowledgeable guys on this, and girls. Don't want to forget you girls, Ashley and Mary. You guys have been awesome. So I don't want to discriminate here, but I really do. I have a great crew that I'm very, very happy with. So we're going to get to everything in just a second, but of course, too, I want to let you know about the ad-free version of the show, because ads are no fun, right? Ads are just tough. They're interruptive. You can solve that by going to patreon.com/WWE podcast, and you get a totally streamlined experience with this show. No ads, nothing. Just complete wrestling audio. You can get it for just $1 a month. Literally, I mean, it's $1 a month, the entire library of this show. So I think that's a pretty good value if you ask me. And you also get a shout out on the show, and you can even come on the show, right? And talk about whatever you'd like with me for your own podcast, and I'll publish it on this feed. So a lot of value there. If you're interested, head on over there. Or you can just go to the website, www.podcast.com. You can't follow me on Twitter. That is still banned. I'm still sitting in a holding cell with handcuffs. No one's talking to me. I made that analogy yesterday, but it literally is that. I mean, so I'm just getting no feedback whatsoever, and I'm guessing it's because they are just overwhelmed with requests and all that kind of thing. I don't know. But nonetheless, I'm still in Twitter jail, hopefully being released soon on bail. We shall see. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening to the show. The show continues to grow, and it's because of you. So tell a friend, or rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts. It is the biggest way to help us. And I recently got a very great and thorough review on Apple Podcast that was very much appreciated, and some not so nice, right? Like somebody said I'm racist. I don't know how that came out of it, right? I have no idea where that came from. I don't talk about anything really political, but apparently they read through the lines and did the lazy analysis. I'm thinking I'm racist. I don't know on what. I don't know. But it's such a really a look into the person's mind of like, oh well, no, they don't agree with everything I do, so they must be racist. I mean, it's so lazy. It's just lazy. But anyway, moving on to what you guys are here for, and that is wrestling nostalgia. Really fun conversation. Let's not wait any longer. Let's get to Anthony and myself in depth talking about your favorite thing, wrestling. So here we go. As always, I'll talk to you guys soon. It is Wrestling Nostalgia Night, and we're covering pay-per-views right now that I don't think I've ever mentioned on this show. I've got Anthony DeMarco with me tonight to discuss Cyber Sunday, Taboo Tuesday, and there were 5 of these that ran from 2004 to 2008, and we'll touch on some of the matches, the culture of WWE, just really the uniqueness of this pay-per-view, if it's something maybe that could continue in WWE or really resurrect itself in WWE. So, Anthony, welcome back to the show. Hope you're staying safe in this crazy time and environment that we're in right now.
Yeah, pretty crazy world we live in right now, to put it lightly. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to revisit one of the most unique pay-per-views in probably WWE history.
It really is, and I think as we look back, and I guess just jump right into it here, these pay-per-views, I mean, I can remember when they announced them. Specifically, I mean, if we look at Taboo Tuesday, the first one in 2004, when they talked about this, I said, wait a minute. Why, Taboo Tuesday? I was like, I don't think they've ever held a pay-per-view on Tuesday. So the name of it, I was kind of confused about, but the concept was so different from anything that had preceded it. As I look at the statistics here, the buy rate was 174,000. Not exactly going to blow you through the roof, but certainly respectable. Again, at a time when pro wrestling was still, I guess, in the back end of its glory days. You still had the leftovers from the Attitude Era. You had up-and-coming stars like Brock Lesnar. You had Batista at the top. So certainly, when you look at the buy rate, it's respectable. Certainly, that's not exactly something that we look at today. It's all about the network. But this was a concept that was really, really unique in a time that was certainly still part of the golden era of wrestling as we kind of look back in our rearview mirror. What did you think when this first came about, this whole concept of Taboo Tuesday back in 2004?
Well, I was super excited because it was a very interactive pay-per-view, probably the first of its kind. And, think back to like the early 2000s. Like, I don't even think Facebook was around. Like, MSN Messenger was probably like the big social media at the time. So I remember, I was 10 years old in 2004. So I remember like being so excited for it, and then you'd have to like run to your desktop computer and like log on to WWE.com, or not even log on. You would just go on to WWE.com for some of us who had dial up, and you'd have to punch in your vote. And like you said, pay-per-view on a Tuesday, that was a very foreign concept. And at the time, SmackDown was taped on Tuesdays. It was aired on Thursdays, but it was taped on Tuesdays. So I know that Taboo Tuesday was, at least at the beginning, a Raw pay-per-view. So I'm not sure if they just ran 2 shows in a night or rescheduled SmackDown so they could have more of a buy rate for the pay-per-view. But I just remember thinking how cool of a concept it was. I think maybe it originated because at the time, especially on the Raw side of things, they were kind of going through like a changing of the guard. Like, they had just started to disintegrate Evolution. Like, at the time of the first ever Taboo Tuesday, Randy Orton had just disbanded from the group. The Rock had pretty much left for good. Ditto for Steve Austin. Goldberg had gone as well. Scott Steiner, like a lot of the guys who were big in 2003 were no longer around. So I think that maybe this had to do with trying to, spice things up a bit on the Raw side of things. And, I remember they had this concept where you'd have 3 guys up for, I guess, to vote for to go against the World Heavyweight Champion at the time, who was Triple H. And then the 2 other guys who lost out on the vote would tag together and go for the tag team gold. And in the first year, I believe it was Edge, Chris Benoit, and HBK. And HBK obviously got voted in favor to go up against Triple H for the World Heavyweight title. And I just thought it was such a cool concept because it was just a way to see who the fans really wanted to see in the main event. And it would be pretty cool to see a similar voting concept in today's environment, where a lot of times guys who are pushed aren't necessarily the choice of the fans. But I just thought, given maybe, I don't think stale is the right word, but more of like the winds of change going on in Raw, it was a cool way to get fans really interacted with the product.
This is certainly a pay-per-view that, when you look back, it seemed almost ahead of its time in a weird way, because it was a foreign concept for all of us sitting at home, watching wrestling for many years, ordering a pay-per-view. You didn't have a say in what happened, and all of a sudden WWE says, hey, why don't the fans vote? Literally take a vote, and you will be able to decide the fate of the superstars. I think that was like one of the taglines is like, you decide their fate or something like that. And you got to decide the stipulations. In some cases, you got to decide the actual superstars in the match. And it was an awesome concept. I mean, like you said, I mean, Twitter wasn't around until 2006 or something like that. Like, no social media was around. I'm pretty sure Facebook, then known as the Facebook, when you had to actually have a school account to log into Facebook, had just started in 2004. So this is a time before most of us can even conceive, and some of you listening may not even know that this time existed, where there wasn't social media, and logging onto your computer meant that you had to deal with phone lines. And I think in 2004, the transition from dial-up to broadband had really started to take a stranglehold on the internet consumer. And so I think the majority of us, well, I shouldn't say majority, it was probably a significant amount that had broadband that would be able to go to WWE.com, and you would go in and you'd vote, and you could vote. If I'm not mistaken, could you vote as many times as you wanted, or did they say, hey, you can only vote X amount of times? I can't remember what the stipulation was on that.
That I don't remember, but like I always just remember, do you think that the votes were actually real? Mm-hmm. That's like what I was always kind of like, because it always kind of swayed in a direction that you thought it would play out or that best fit the storyline. Or maybe the WWE was just very, careful about how they booked things, and they only gave you certain options that they knew were going to sway in a certain direction.
That is the key, right? The integrity of the vote results. You will never know. I'm going to go with giving WWE the benefit of the doubt and say that the results that they showed on air were legitimate and on the up and up. Could they have skewed them? Sure, they could have. I would think and hope that they wouldn't do that. So we'll go with the premise that they kept the results' integrity intact. So with that being said, yes, even though the results' integrity are intact, assumingly, they did give you results or options that are... A lot of times you would go, well, no one's going to vote for this person or this person or this stipulation or this stipulation. There was usually an obvious choice. And so WWE would really kind of steer you in the direction that they probably would want you to go anyway. But to give us that option to potentially put a ridiculous card together would be awesome. I mean, I think if this was done today, that you would have a much different outcome with people trying to hijack the card to make it ridiculous. Like, in other words, if they put in Stone Cold as a special guest referee option with, like, say, or Hornswoggle is an option, and they put in, like, I don't know, Jerry the King Lawler is also an option. Like, you would have, I think, people trying to hijack it to make a ridiculous pay-per-view card. And I think that'd be a lot of fun, because WWE, if it happened today, and that's a much larger question, that you would have WWE smartly preparing for all options. I mean, no matter how ridiculous the fans make it, it could be a lot of fun. Do you think this is something they can implement today?
To be quite honest, I'm surprised that they haven't, because they're so deep into the social media game with like Twitter and Facebook Live and all these different platforms that they use. Like, it's kind of weird, and it makes you wonder why they haven't re-explored it. Like, it's been, I think you said, since 2008 that they've done a Cyber Sunday / Taboo Tuesday. But I think if I were to take a guess, I believe they're scared, because over the last decade in the social media era and the big boom, it's kind of like created like these online communities. And I think that's what's really, I think it's had a big impact on the quote unquote unconventional crowds, which led to John Cena getting booed and Roman Reigns getting booed, and these crowds kind of going against the grain, as opposed to back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the old school wrestling fans would just kind of take what they were getting fed. And, I remember in 04 and 05, HBK won the vote both years to go up against Triple H for the World Heavyweight title, 2 years in a row. But we all know that at that time on Monday Night Raw, the big ticket money match was always Shawn Michaels versus versus Triple H. It was a run-on thing for quite a long time. But if we were do it today, I don't think we would see the same thing. Like you said, like let's say it was, Brock Lesnar was world champion and it was Roman Reigns with, I don't know, Baron Corbin and a name's escaping me, but Bobby Lashley. For WWE, Roman Reigns would be the ideal choice, much like Shawn Michaels was 15 years ago at Taboo Tuesday. But you could be sure that it would probably be a Baron Corbin, just because, to your point, the modern day fan base likes to hijack crowds whenever they can, and this would be a direct avenue for them to do so. So I would have to believe that the only reason they have not revisited a similar type of pay-per-view is strictly because they know or fear that the modern day fans will go out of their way to just make the most ridiculous selections.
It's funny, you said the key word there. You took my thunder. Fear. That's exactly what WWE, the reason they have not implemented a similar format pay-per-view is fear. But while if that is indeed their excuse for not implementing something like this, I would argue against that, saying, well, give them all options that are available. Allow some wacky options in there that if the fans choose it, it still wouldn't hurt a story. You could come up with all scenarios. You would have just a production meeting and go, okay, if the fans choose wrestler X, we'll do this. Wrestler Y will do this. WWE would still have a large element of control here. It's not that they can just input anybody that they want. You're still going to only be able to select out of a very predetermined pool of candidates. So it could be the fear, but WWE would really be missing out on the fans truly taking control of a pay-per-view, again, with a pre-selected pool of candidates. But some of the matchups would be ridiculous and fun, and I think you'd have a really large outpouring of support for this because the fans would want to tune in to see, hey, is this going to be something ridiculous? What is this? What's the outcome going to be? Is my selection going to be picked? Yeah, it's fear, but you still control who's in that pool that the fans are choosing from. So I would love to see something like this. They always say all the time, oh, the fans choose. Well, show us again. I mean, it's been 12 years. I think something like this would be awesome to see, and I would love to see something like this. It would shake things up again, as Vince likes to shake things up. That would be, I think, a very well-timed pay-per-view to have right now, especially considering the current circumstances we're in with no live crowd, and I don't count the NXT trainees. I'm talking about a true live audience that's not going to just follow the narrative like good little boys and girls. I'm talking about the true fans there. But to me, this would be great timing, and I don't know how they're not considering this right now. I've heard nothing of this returning. Even in the last 12 years, I've never heard anything or any rumors of this. I honestly don't know what the turnoff is for this pay-per-view, and I'm not saying do it on a regular basis, but once in a while, and it's been over a decade, this would be great right now.
Yeah, and I think the fear comes from the fact is back then, like, I don't know if you've been watching the Ruthless Aggression series, but they were very much talking about the fact that Vince and the leadership at WWE behind the scenes were saying to the guys, like, it's your turn to try and grab the torch and run with it, because Rock was gone and Austin was gone. And like we said, especially on Raw, there was such like an open avenue for someone to shoot to the top. And at this time, a lot of the mid-card guys were either former stars or on the way to becoming main event stars, like Edge, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Shelton Benjamin, Randy Orton. Like, all these guys were kind of like in the mix, like hovering between upper mid card, lower main card, and the only true main event guys were HBK and Triple H. And I felt like there was more of a trust with Vince McMahon and the talent at that time, because even though, let's say, Jericho and Benoit and Edge weren't, let's say, like household names at the time, there was still like that long like track record of trust, or even guys like Christian who were there and Kane. But nowadays, it seems like more like WWE has like predetermined guys who they want to live and die with. Like we were joking that going back to the fall, that we all knew that Roman Reigns was going to be in the main event at WrestleMania for the Universal Championship. And that's what happened. Well, until he bowed out due to the pandemic reasons, but that's what they were going with. Like modern day WWE is basically, they have a pool of 4 or 5 guys that we've talked about in the past, and they almost just kind of recycle these storylines. And they say, okay, well, the choice of the fans has to come from within this pool of guys or girls. But back then, it was more like, okay, so they're getting behind Eddie Guerrero, we'll push Eddie Guerrero. They're getting behind Chris Benoit, okay, we'll push Chris Benoit. Like, they were more open-minded to give the upper mid-card guys a shot, even if they weren't, you know, the prototypical chosen ones, if the fans got behind them. And I think that back then, because Austin and Rock had just left, that's why maybe there was more of that trust with Vince, like, hey, like, what do we got to lose here? And I think that why they don't do it nowadays, well, I think it would be great because we saw, a year and a half ago when the McMahon family came out and said, you know, we're giving you guys the power back. It would be a really cool concept, especially with how big Twitter is and all these avenues WWE gives the fan base to, you know, communicate with them and voice their opinions. But I think it just comes down to fear. Like, okay, well, they're going to think outside the box and go with someone who's outside of our predetermined pool of 4 or 5 guys.
And that's assuming that they don't just have a unwritten rule that if the fans just hijack the card and do just ridiculous stuff and choose all the just silly options that are in every match, so there's 8 matches and they choose all silly options, that they don't just fix the results for some of them, right? I mean, that is always an option of which no one will ever know, and no one will ever know that these 5 pay-per-views were not on the up and up. So you can't go into it with that idea, because then it'll ruin the whole premise of the pay-per-view. It'll just be another pay-per-view with the illusion of choice. And so I would like to believe that if this is ever done again, that WWE would just go with what the fans truly voted for. And when you vote, you don't get the results as you do with some polls that you take online. You take this and it just says, thanks for your vote. And that's it. You don't get here's the running total. And that's smart, because then it's a surprise and it makes people tune in or buy the pay-per-view or buy the network in this case to see the results. But I mean, looking at this card, and I don't want to go through all of the cards, but the very first one, since it's in 2004, I mean, when you look at this card, it's like some of this stuff is just such a throwback for me. And you mentioned how old you were. I was, 19 years old. I mean, you're taking me back to some wild times in my life. I mean, you got Sergeant Slaughter defeating Muhammad Hassan, Shelton Benjamin defeating Chris Jericho. Oh boy. I mean, think about the women's division here. They had 2 matches on the card. One of them was a Fulfill Your Fantasy Battle Royal for the Women's Championship. So they not only put a Fulfill Your Fantasy Battle Royal in there, but it's for the Women's Championship, so they're sexualizing the championship. Imagine something like that today. I mean, jeez. And then they had Christy Hemme defeating Carmella in a lingerie pillow fight. You got to have your obligatory lingerie pillow fight in this era of WWE. It's just crazy how far the women's division has come. And then obviously you had Triple H defeating Shawn Michaels for the World Heavyweight Championship in the main event. Randy Orton defeating Ric Flair in a steel cage. I mean, so some of Gene Snitsky versus Kane, and Eugene versus Eric Bischoff. Some of this stuff is I mean, some of it's just outlandish. But honestly, this is a pay-per-view that I may watch start to finish. I have not seen this pay-per-view in probably 10 years. But I do remember these results. And you had, if I'm not wrong here, Gene Snitsky, didn't he accidentally cause a miscarriage with Lita or something like that? Or that was his whole thing of it's not my fault?
Yeah, like he hit Kane in the back with the chair, and Kane fell on Lita, caused a miscarriage, and then, like WWE always does, they take one thing and they just string it out for way too long, and they pit to death, and his theme song used to start with him saying it wasn't my fault. And then they did a bit where like he punted a baby into the crowd,
That's
obviously
right.
not a real one, like, but I don't know, like, and I saw this online like a few weeks ago where someone was saying like, you all criticize WWE for the dumb shit they do nowadays, but they used to do so much dumb shit back then too that you were okay with. And it is true, because I remember eating that Gene Snitsky stuff up and just finding it hilarious, but I think it was more just the way it was presented, that it was stupid, but it was just so outlandishly hilarious that, and then also bear in mind that it was also because the main event stuff was so damn good that you were able to put up with the nonsense, like the wasn't my fault thing. And just to say, like, on a side note, like the Bischoff and Eugene storyline, like I think the storyline was actually that Eugene was his nephew.
Yep.
And the stipulation for this match, I believe it became a hair versus hair match. I remember this was at the time when Edge had first turned heel, and him and Benoit went up against La Resistance, which were Quebecers, which is from where I'm from, which I always found funny. And I seem to remember, well, I won't give it away if you're going to watch it, but that was pretty cool, seeing Benoit team with a heel Edge to go for the tag team titles. And Benoit and Edge had won the tag team gold earlier in the year, which kind of made this an intriguing angle. But it's like you said, you look back at this time, and no doubt there were some outlandish things, to say nothing of the women's matches, but it just goes to show that, at least from my perspective, I can only speak for myself here, but I was able to watch it at the time and even think back on it now and go back and watch it, 15 years older, and say, I'm okay with this foolishness because the main event stuff was so damn good that the minor comedy angles I'm completely okay with.
Yes, the main events were so good that it just absorbed the silliness. And the thing is, with the silliness today, it's different than the silliness back then that we accepted, because the crap today is just an outright exposure of the business. It's just taking kayfabe and murdering it in front of the camera, rather than just, well, this isn't plausible with Gene Snitsky. Well, no, I guess it's not plausible, but it doesn't expose the business for what it is. Like the guys and girls, for the most part, like, they took their in-ring competition seriously. Like, Kane really wanted to kill Gene Snitsky, and yeah, that was a ridiculous storyline, but the physicality and the in-ring competitiveness still rang true. That is what wasn't a victim of the silliness more often than not. And yeah, you could go back to Katie Vick, you could go back to Triple H with Kane in the casket and all that stuff. That was honestly just like, I mean, I remember that really, really well. And the Katie Vick angle is just berated for being one of the worst angles of all time in professional wrestling as an industry. So terrible. But it wasn't meant to be. It was supposed to be a serious storyline. And Triple H going to the funeral home and having faux sex with a mannequin was just a terrible attempt at comedy. But it didn't expose the business per se. It's a different silliness. And like you said, you have today, or back then, you had stars of the caliber of Triple H versus Shawn Michaels. That is a main event anytime, anywhere, on any platform. I mean, they had some of the best chemistry together that I've ever seen, ever. I mean, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, as great of friends as they were, I think were better enemies. When you look at the rivalry from 2002 to 2004, it is, I think, some of the best written stuff, some of the best performances I've ever seen in matches. When you look at their Last Man Standing match they had at the Rumble in 2004, I believe it was, the Bad Blood 2003 Three Stages of Hell match that they had. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, it is just like stuff, like you said, though. The top card was so good. You had Ric Flair still active. You have Randy Orton still just starting to get into his prime. Chris Benoit. You had Shelton Benjamin and Chris Jericho on the second match of the card. I mean, this is a stacked card, and it was a Taboo Tuesday. You take this card now, this could be a WrestleMania. I mean, really, when you look at it. outside of the women's stuff that would just be replaced with actual matches. So, yeah, I mean, you're right.
Well, like at this time, now I think that Raw at this point in time lacked a bit of high-end star power from a babyface perspective because, Batista, he wasn't even on this card. He was still kind of buried in Evolution. Randy Orton had just broke away from Evolution as a babyface, but it never really worked. It never really got off the ground. And this was kind of the era where Triple H was World Heavyweight Champion pretty much for 3 years straight, except save for a few minor runs from Goldberg and Chris Benoit. And I do remember hearing something about that Shawn Michaels had no interest in being world champion when he returned. I don't know if you heard about that too.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, like my cousin is like a die-hard HBK fan and like read his book and just complete fanboy over him. Because HBK won the inaugural Elimination Chamber in 2002, but apparently he never wanted to have a main event run again as world champion upon his return for whatever reason. And aside from that minor hiccup at the top of the card, at the top of the roster rather, this is probably the best mid-card I've ever seen. Like, Christian, Edge, Benoit, Jericho, Shelton Benjamin was really on the rise here. Like, he was scorching hot at this time. You had Kane rumbling around. Like, even the tag team division, like, La Resistance were, like, an excellent heel tag team. I remember they had, I was a sucker for this, but Hurricane and Rosie. And again, like, this is kind of a stupid gimmick if you think back on it, like the Hurricane and Rosie. But again, like, it wasn't unrealistic. Like, was it kind of silly? Yeah, but it didn't completely expose it for what it was. Like, because on some level, it could be plausible that these two middle-aged guys found it cool to dress up as superheroes, as opposed to the fact that you wouldn't actually have guys looking like Vikings playing bowling. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, that's... Like, it's not so much the gimmicks that are hokey, it's what you have them doing. Because here, like... Yeah, Hurricane and Rosie were as gimmicky as you could get, but they still wrestled. That's what they did. You didn't see them, running around the streets of Los Angeles trying to fight crime on Monday Night Raw. You saw them wrestling. On a side note, I thought the interactions between the Hurricane and The Rock were some of the best ever.
Yes.
I found that hilarious.
Call him the Hamburglar. And so, oh, yeah. Yeah.
You would call Rosie Grimace?
Yes. Oh, God. That's right. Yeah, oh, my God. I forgot about that. Yes.
And they strung out that rival. They strung that out for like a year and a half when The Rock would come back and then like he would bump into him backstage. Like, I remember The Rock came back in like 2004 and you see him stop and he's looking to someone off camera and he's just like, you got a lot of nerve coming around here showing your face to The Rock after all we've been through, and you think it's going to be like, oh, is it Triple H? Is it Stone Cold? Which big rival it is? And you just see Hurricane standing there.
That's right. Oh, God, I forgot about that. Yes, they had it's lightning in a bottle with those two. I mean, you're never going to get them in a serious program, but that's not the point. Like, they had just great on-air. Like, that's what is extremely difficult to do in wrestling is comedy and do it organically. They had that.
Yeah, and again, like, The Rock, like, in his heyday, like, it was hard to find anyone who did comedy better than him. And I think, like, we can all agree, The Rock got over as a major babyface because people found him so damn funny when he was the corporate champion. And, well, you could speak to that better than I could, but, like, when The Rock became a main event player, he was a heel with Vince McMahon. Is it fair to say that the crowd got behind him because of how funny he was?
Yeah, the role that they cast him in of a heel was not, and they tried everything. He was so magnetic and so entertaining and extremely talented in the ring, and you could see star written all over him, that the fans were just recognizing, hey, like, we're ready for this guy to be our guy. You can cast him as a heel all you'd like, but it will be superseded by how good this guy is, and we are ready for him to turn babyface so we can love him. There was just no denying it. There was just no denying that it was just time. And the crowd obviously just exploded for it. I remember when they tried to turn him, or they did turn him babyface, only to turn him back heel when the fans thought that it was, oh, finally he turned on Vince and he gave Vince the people's elbow, and then he joined the corporation like a week or two later, and it was just like Stone Cold turning heel. He turned back to babyface only to turn on the WWF to join the alliance. Like, they kept doing it. I mean, I think that was a misstep, but him joining the corporation, honestly, was probably the best thing that happened to The Rock, because he got the exposure with Vince. He was in the biggest storyline in WWE every Monday night. He was involved with Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was involved with The Undertaker. He was involved with Triple H. And yes, I know we're getting on a Rock tangent, but I remember that feeling very well. That even as oh my gosh, how was I old? 15, 16 years old. I was thinking, why am I supposed to hate this guy? He's hilarious. The jokes he would crack, the insults. He was insulting some of my favorite guys, but he was just so funny I didn't care. And he was, so his charisma and his entertainment value superseded any kind of casting that WWE tried to put on him.
And I think it's just because, well, at least when I was growing up, and it's even happened a lot more currently, that more wrestlers than not get over from being a heel. Like, at this time, like I during 2004, this Taboo Tuesday, this was like the first time I ever saw like a sadistic Edge, because he was a babyface in the summer of 2004, and I remember he had a long rivalry with Randy Orton for the Intercontinental Championship, which is ironic because of what's going on today with those two. But I remember he turned on Benoit and he like walked out, and then no one really saw him as a main event guy. Everyone liked Edge as like a middle card babyface, and for the most part he had been solely a babyface since splitting from Edge and Christian, which had already been like 3 years at this point. But it was when they turned him heel, where, not for the reasons like The Rock, who was, magnetic and like very charismatic and hilarious, but Edge just found his niche and got people to get behind him. Like, he got good heel heat as a heel. And then obviously he won the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match at Mania 21. And then he just had a superstar rise after that. But you see it all the time that, like, look, even Randy Orton, like, he needed an inaugural heel singles run to completely get over. Like, he face planted as a babyface when he first detached from Evolution. And I think that's what we saw here at this time in WWE, that they just had a lot of mid-card guys that they were willing to push and willing to give the chance. And we saw it in Edge have a big rise on Raw, and then, kind of Cena was doing the same thing on SmackDown, and Batista did as well on Raw. And it was just a very cool time. And I remember we kind of reviewed the WrestleMania 20 main event with Benoit versus HBK and Triple H, and we said that it kind of put a bow on the Ruthless Aggression era as a whole. This year was kind of like, it was still Ruthless Aggression and stayed that way until, I would say, about 2007. But you really saw a changing of the guard of people who were going to kind of lead them into the late 2000s, more PG era type.
Yeah, exactly. This was a transitional year on a lot of levels. You are now fully into the Ruthless Aggression, as you mentioned, and I saw a couple of episodes of that, although right now I'm still enthralled with the Undertaker Last Ride documentary, and I can't wait for Chapter 4. But this was extremely a much different time than it was in previous years and in subsequent years, because it was the transition. Like you mentioned, Rock and Austin, gone. They are now into Hollywood, and Austin is retired due to injury. You had guys that were the mainstays that are no longer there, that, like you mentioned, it is time to take the torch and run with it. And that's exactly what some of these guys did. And yeah, you still had Triple H and Shawn Michaels being the anchor for Monday Night Raw and doing a hell of a job with it. Chris Benoit, I don't care what you say about what he did, right? We're talking about his professional career, was to me one of the best pure wrestlers I've ever seen in my life. You had kind of the one-offs with Eugene and Bischoff and all that kind of thing, but the roster was so damn talented, and it just evolved and more. And honestly, when you look back, was Brock Lesnar even on this show? No, he wasn't. Brock Lesnar wasn't even on this show. Was that because he was part of SmackDown? Is that why, though? I think he was. This was a Raw pay-per-view, so that's probably why. We're talking about
he was on SmackDown, but he had already left at this point.
Oh, that's right. That's right. We're talking. Okay, I'm thinking it was just before WrestleMania. It was after WrestleMania. You're right. So Brock Lesnar gone. I mean, so this was the time to have guys step up. Undertaker was around, but he had just turned back to the dead man. So
and he was SmackDown.
Yep, he was on SmackDown. So this is, again, it's funny that you mentioned that this was a brand specific pay-per-view. This is only the roster on Raw. So it was such a loaded time for WWE. And when you look on to the next year, I'm looking at Taboo Tuesday 2005. We still had Eugene around. Mankind defeated Carlito. I forgot about that. We had John Cena defeating Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat match for the WWE Championship. And I think John Cena at this time had transitioned into the spinner belt. I'm pretty sure that
unfortunately,
yeah, that beloved children's toy that they had made grown men walk around with it was just, to me, that was just such a disrespect to the championship. But that's another rant of a topic. But Ric Flair's still active. I mean, Ric Flair was a year or so away from retiring at WrestleMania against Shawn Michaels. Batista was really starting to solidify himself. He defeated Jonathan Coachman, though, in a street fight, so not exactly a career win there. But as we moved on, and this was a match I actually watched just before we came on here. This was back in 2007, or was it the final one? Batista versus Triple H at Cyber Sunday 2000, and I'll get it here, 2007, yeah. And we had Batista defeat The Undertaker at Cyber Sunday 2007. So it shows you, as you mentioned, Batista, who was buried in the Evolution group, eventually made his way out. He faced Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship, defeated Triple H at WrestleMania for the World Heavyweight Championship, and then got in a program a couple of years later with The Undertaker. And I think I've forgotten how good that this rivalry actually was with The Undertaker. I know many people, when they look at their favorite rivalries, this isn't even on the list. But when you go back and look at Batista versus Undertaker, so their matches were actually pretty darn good. I mean, like for being two big men, muscular men, I really enjoyed this. And seeing Stone Cold be special guest referee obviously is always a treat. So I know it kind of bounced all over the place there, but I think Batista really was underappreciated, underestimated, I think, for several years here.
Well, because following WrestleMania 21, when he became World Heavyweight Champion on Raw and Cena became WWE Champion on SmackDown, they did the swap where they sent Batista to SmackDown and Cena to Raw. And we together reviewed HBK versus John Cena, which main evented WrestleMania 23, which was an excellent match. And we both kind of agreed that it kind of completely closed the book on the Ruthless Aggression era. But lower in the card of that pay-per-view was the first ever Batista versus Undertaker match. And to your point, it was absolutely excellent. And I believe Batista has gone on record in saying that he was very upset at this because I think they went on before 9 o'clock. And I remember watching it live and thinking to myself, like, really, the World Heavyweight Championship match is going on before Trump versus McMahon? Like, that's kind of weird. And it was just an incredible match for two guys of that size. And for the succeeding 2 years, Batista, Undertaker, and Edge kind of carried SmackDown. Like, I believe the very next year at WrestleMania, Edge versus Undertaker was the main event for the World Heavyweight Championship. And you're right, Batista was one of the guys who really took advantage from this transitional phase. And I know he kind of flip-flopped back and forth from, like, challenging for the World Heavyweight Championship and the WWE Championship. And, like, just on a side note, like, isn't it such a damn shame how devalued the world heavyweight title was after, like, in the later years because they just completely abolished the brand split?
Yes, because they built. I think they did. They did a good job of building it, and you're right. It just got tanked, and it's shameful.
Yeah, like, I just hated it, and that's why I've always said, if you don't want to do a brand split and you cannot help yourselves with a stupid wild card rule, like, fine. But there has to be one world heavyweight title. Like, I think I've heard Jim Cornette say it, where, like, imagine trying to tell Hulk Hogan that you're only half the world champion back in the 80s, early 90s. Like, it doesn't work. And you can only have one world champion. If you have two separate entities where you only cross over maybe once or twice a year at a Royal Rumble or an interpromotional match at WrestleMania, fine, I could get behind you. But, like, when you really mix it, it's when the devaluing starts. Like, I remember, like, in the latter years of the World Heavyweight Championship, when Sheamus was winning it in the opening match at WrestleMania in under 20 seconds.
And Daniel Bryan, yeah.
Yeah, or, like, Alberto Del Rio versus Jack Swagger. Like,
Yep.
Who the hell cares? Like, I don't want the World Heavyweight Championship to feel less than the U.S. title. And it's like, I remember they eventually got rid of it and they had the unification match with Cena and Randy Orton. And then a year and a half later, they went back to the brand split and just created a new championship, which, like, always made me wonder, like, why didn't you just bring back the World Heavyweight title? But that's kind of irrelevant at this point. But it was just, like you said, they did such a good job to have, Triple H hold it for, I believe, 5 different occasions. HBK held it. Randy Orton held it. Goldberg held it. John Cena held it once or twice. Edge basically made it what it was today. And, on a side note, Undertaker pretty much only held the World Heavyweight title for the last 10 years of his career. Like, I don't think he's actually won the WWE Championship since the year 1999, if I'm not mistaken. So they really made an effort to make the World Heavyweight Championship, like, very, very prestigious and the title of SmackDown. But when they took away the brand extension and just started making the World Heavyweight title show up on Raw and take a piggyback seat to the WWE Championship, it really devalued it and kind of discredited all the hard work they put into it. And just that thought of what they did with Undertaker, of never holding the WWE Championship over the last 20 years, like, the World Heavyweight Championship was the only world title he held in the back half of his career.
Yeah, and that's something I never really thought of about the World Heavyweight Championship that just kind of dissolved after the unification match. And I honestly, I mean, when you look at today's roster too, the more I think about it, the more I don't want a lot of championships. And I know that what they're trying to do is to make sure that each brand has a champion. But you're all employed by WWE. WWE should have one world champion. It should have really one tag team, men's and women's tag team champions. I'm fine with the United States Championship hanging around. I'm fine with you can make an argument that either United States or Intercontinental Championship should be there. But my point is, the less championships there are, the more valuable they become off the bat. I mean, it's simple economics, supply and demand. The more championships you have, the less valuable they are. And like you said, if WWE just cannot resist scratching the itch of never ever adhering to their brand split rules, and they never have. Look at the history of all of their brand splits they've ever done, ever. They cannot keep to their own rules. There's always an excuse of why so-and-so is on SmackDown or on Raw. Or in this case, last year, the wildcard rule. Now, as it stands currently, they have a brand invitational of which can be implemented 4 times a year. I mean, LOL. I would seriously I would be extremely surprised if they actually keep to that number. They're not going to. I mean, just like the wild card rule said, you can only have 4 or 5 guys, whatever the number was, at a time on any brand, which they didn't even adhere to that for a week. So I will be shocked if they do. But to your point, I mean, it's like either have the brand split or don't. You can't be halfway. It's like being half pregnant. Well, you either are or you aren't. And they like to split it down the middle. And I'm not a fan of that. But back in this era, back in 2004, 2005, 2006, the rosters were so damn good I wasn't so critical of it. I also didn't have a podcast to think critically about it. I was just kind of enjoying it blindly. But the rosters were so good on both brands, I wasn't so angry about guys and gals showing up on another show with little to no explanation because the rosters were so stacked.
But like the initial brand split was done in 2002. But until I would say 2007, like they really adhered to the brand split. Like I remember the drafts that they would have was like a big thing. Like it wasn't even called a superstar shakeup. Like it was like a legitimate like podium thing. And another part of it that I found made it so cool, the brand extension, was that you had a face running each show. And I know that having an authority figure isn't always the best. And I'm not talking about like Vince McMahon or Stephanie McMahon. I'm talking about like a third party, like thinking back to Taboo Tuesday on in 04 and 05, like Eric Bischoff steering that ship was incredible. On the SmackDown side of things, Paul Heyman was fantastic at it in 03 and early 2004. And I remember even Kurt Angle had a brief stint as SmackDown GM, and then they transitioned to Teddy Long, who kind of wore out his welcome, but he was good for a short while there as well. But I think that they should have some GM recognized general manager, recognized authority figure, not just some random bald guy calling the shots when something serious happens on SmackDown or Raw, which we've seen lately. But in this time frame, 02 to 07 approximately, like they adhered to it. Like you would never see random guys show up on opposing shows. In the Royal Rumble, yeah, we would see wrestlers from different brands fight each other, but that's what made the Rumble so cool. Like I remember in the Rumbles in like 04 and 05, there would always be a point in the match where like four guys from Raw would line up on one side and four guys from SmackDown would line up on the other side, and they would brawl each other, which would usually lead to like a Raw versus SmackDown match at WrestleMania, like we saw with Kurt Angle and HBK at WrestleMania 21 and Taker versus Orton at the same pay-per-view. And that's what made those matches so special. Like it's an interpromotional match. You'll never get to see this match until now. And that's what made the brand extension cool, which by relation made the two separate world champions acceptable. Like when you would see at a Survivor Series, because back then, like we said, there was only brand-specific pay-per-views, and the only ones where they would mix and match were Rumble, Mania, Survivor Series, SummerSlam. And it would be cool when, you'd see Triple H with the World Heavyweight title cross-pass with JBL behind, like, backstage, who was the WWE champion. Like, that's what made it kind of like, okay, well, these are the two World Heavyweight world champions, but they're from different worlds. It was almost like seeing the WWE champion cross-pass with the WCW champion. But it was because it was done separately and they adhered to it, and it was strict for 5 years. Or like, I think at that time they wouldn't do it every year, but once every year and a half or once every 2 years, they would do like a draft. And that was a big deal. Like I remember it was a huge deal when like the Big Show came to Raw, or Kurt Angle came to Raw, or Randy Orton went to SmackDown, because you had seen them specifically only on Raw or SmackDown for 2+ years. But as soon as you start, loosening it a bit and just taking away a bit of the integrity of what it's all about, what the concept is all about, is when the devaluing of the title starts, because then you're just like, to your point, well, now there's more titles and it's all kind of one show. So who's the actual world champion? And well, if it's Intercontinental versus US title, well, obviously the Intercontinental is going to be way more high, and the U.S. title is pretty much the equivalent of what the European Championship used to be. And that's when it starts to get murky for me, and I don't like it. But if you keep it completely separate, I have no problem with the two separate world champions and the two separate mid-card belts. But once you start mixing and matching, that's when they lose it for me.
Yeah, and here's the reason why I think they do what they do over the last 5+ years or so, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, in the more modern eras of whatever the heck we're in now. I guess we're still in the PG era. When they have ever done their brand splits, they have very rarely, if ever, been faithful to those brand splits. And as you mentioned, prior to that, with the drafts, they felt like a big deal. I didn't need a contrived war room of Fox executives having zero knowledge about any professional wrestling. Apparently, they're calling the shots of who's getting drafted. I mean, I didn't want to go into the draft. It was just absolutely an abysmal presentation of a draft. I know what they were doing, but it was just preposterous. But my point is, back to the Ruthless Aggression era, when the brand splits were true and they did keep these worlds separate, I can remember the feelings of like, oh my God. And yes, we all know how terrible Goldberg versus Lesnar was at WrestleMania 20. I was there. We all know. But I remember when Goldberg speared Brock, and when Brock showed up on Raw and he F5 Stone Cold, who was the referee, I was losing it. I was like, oh my God, like, what is he doing here? He's on SmackDown. You actually felt that way. And that has not happened in the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years since they have kind of gone back and forth with the brand split, not brand split. We're going to do it. We're not. We're going to shake up, because they've never been faithful to it. And I think the reason that they have been faithful to it in the modern PG era is because of star power. It's simple star power, that they feel that a roster in and of itself, by itself, on its own island, is not strong enough to draw the ratings that maybe that they want or they need, or they're contractually obligated to stay in with X amount of range of demographics, whatever the case may be. It's telling of this lack of star power in the modern era versus back then when they had Batista, Triple H, Kane, Taker, Rock off and on, Kurt Angle. I mean, you go on and on. That's a loaded all-star roster where they could stay separate and not have to worry about a lack of star power on either show. So I think that, to me, is the number one reason that they just can't help themselves in the modern era of not being true to their brands.
Yeah, and just look at, who was in the main event title matches at Mania from like 03 to 07. Like, you had some constants like Triple H, but Batista was there one year, Benoit was there one year, John Cena was there another. Like, it was always kind of changing. Booker T. Then on the SmackDown side, you kind of had JBL, you had Kurt Angle, you had Eddie Guerrero, you had John Cena and Batista too sharing their times at the top of SmackDown. Undertaker. It just felt like back then, and to your point, it's because they had the star power at their disposal that they were able to give more guys a chance. But then you look at the current product over the last 5 years. Well, who's been in the main events? Brock, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, rinse, repeat. Brock, Rollins, Drew, Roman Reigns. Like, it's always kind of the same 4 or 5 guys shuffling in and out. And I think that's where it's kind of gotten stale, where there's some guys you've been waiting to be stars, like, let's say, for instance, a Shinsuke Nakamura. But because they were reluctant to give him that leeway that they gave to, let's say, an Eddie Guerrero or Chris Benoit, now they're still relying on, Roman Reigns. Like, take Braun Strowman, for instance. Like, I think for the most part, his title run has been decent given the circumstances and the major lack of star power on SmackDown, which we've seen at the forefront given the fact that they basically gave AJ Styles to SmackDown because of that. But they gave Braun Strowman that world title push out of necessity, because once Roman Reigns bowed out, they simply had nobody else. Drew McIntyre, like, again, I think that he is well deserving this title run, and I hope he has it for a while, and it was the right decision. But again, like, who else were you really going to give it to? There really is no other babyface aside from maybe Kevin Owens on Raw who could hold that title for him. Now, I think it's a about time that they finally give Lashley a main event push. Maybe not necessarily as a world champion, but I think it's much deserved that he at least becomes like a heel contender for the belt. And on a side note, I love the pairing with him and MVP, but maybe now with this lack of star power of, Roman Reigns not being around and Brock obviously on his annual like post-Mania hiatus and just Dean Ambrose going away, maybe now they're going to be forced to roll the dice on some guys like Braun and Bobby Lashley and maybe a Shinsuke Nakamura if they ever decide to go down that road again. But maybe it could be a sign of things to come and give them a chance to do what they did 15 years ago when they had so much success.
Well, there's no better time to do it, and I concur with the Lashley deal. I mean, if you've listened to or people that are listening now know how I feel about Bobby Lashley, that I think this is the best that he's ever been positioned in WWE. And MVP, I know we're getting to the current product, but it's hard not to tie it back in. The MVP element has been invaluable and will continue to be invaluable to Lashley, who we all know is not great on the mic. He has never been a great promo. He's just not. But you know what? Neither is Brock Lesnar, and he's got Paul Heyman. Like, you don't have to always be a great talker if you have a manager that is just that good. And MVP has truly been just that, the MVP of Bobby Lashley's career and Monday Night Raw. To be honest, I mean, every segment he's in, he's believable. He's all in. He's a great talker. He's convincing. He's quick-witted. He's got everything you need in a heel manager. And to me, Bobby Lashley, I hope that at Backlash that this is not a one and done for Bobby Lashley, because right now I think they need to either, or get off the pot. Like, piss or get off the pot. I mean, I had something else, but they need to do with Bobby Lashley what they should have done probably from the beginning with him. Build him as a damn monster. This guy looks the part. Stop putting him in stupid, ridiculous storylines with Lana and whatever other three sisters, that terrible promo we had. Like, make him a damn monster. Make this about Lashley, not so much about Drew. I said this last night on my show that, hey, Drew McIntyre is already a made man. This should honestly be focused around Lashley. Drew needs somebody to tango with, and maybe it's a Lashley versus Lesnar deal down the line, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on Bobby Lashley's end to get him to that point where seeing Lashley versus Lesnar it feels special. And it would still kind of feel special because we haven't seen it before, and their body types are somewhat similar, and they're both monsters. But Bobby Lashley has been defined as kind of this mid-card guy that looks the part. He's athletic, but he doesn't. You know where he's kind of positioned. He's kind of in the middle lane, middle of the road. He might win a United States Championship, but he's not really going to be the top of the line. That's how he's been defined. That's just how they position him every day that he's been in WWE. Well, this could be a new day for him. No pun intended, I guess. This could really be a new day for him where he is positioned as a true top guy, a true top heel in WWE. And I think that the championship match at Backlash will be very, very telling. Not who's going to win, because we all know that Drew McIntyre is retaining, and as he should. More of how Drew wins, to me, is what is concerning if they're truly going to look at Bobby Lashley as a potential future top heel. Because if Drew McIntyre outright beats him, flat KOs him with a Claymore, and it's a clean victory, that's concerning to me, because I want to see Lashley built up and see what his true potential is. See him maybe re-challenge for the championship, and maybe the second time around it's more of a threat. See him against Brock Lesnar. The star power is what's needed, and Drew is a made man. To me, this is all about Bobby Lashley.
Honestly, I think this is probably the best feud they could have gone with right now with Drew McIntyre. This was a feud I wanted them to do right out of Mania. I found the Seth Rollins match kind of useless with Drew McIntyre. And it kind of reminded me of last year when they had AJ Styles versus Seth Rollins, where like everyone was just like, oh, this is a dream match, so let's rush into it. And then it was a one and done and we never saw it again. And I'm kind of fearful that's what happened with Drew and Seth. But as for Bobby Lashley, going back to when he debuted in early 2005, he's always scratched the surface of the main event, but never quite been there. Like, He had a run as U.S. champion on SmackDown. Then he won the ECW World Heavyweight Championship when that was the third brand. He represented Donald Trump in the Battle of the Billionaires. Then when he came back, he had a mediocre babyface run. I believe he had a short feud with Roman Reigns in 2018. But then he had a pretty good run when he won the Intercontinental Championship, and he had his, I forget the guy's name, Leo Rush talking for him. But now you kind of see they're bringing out the vicious side of him. And I really hope that they string this on until SummerSlam. Like, I'm hoping that at Backlash, it's somewhat of a false finish. Maybe that Drew gets so frustrated that he can't outright beat Lashley, he gets disqualified, or Lashley goes like crazy and vicious and he gets disqualified. Like, I want to see this drawn out for a long time, because Lashley in this vicious heel deployment, which he is at his best. MVP has been incredible since coming back. I was really down on his return because I'm just like, what the hell is this guy doing now? Like, he sucked back then, he's going to suck now. But as a heel manager, he's found his niche alongside Bobby Lashley. You know, it's gotten to the point now with me that in such a short time, they've made me buy into Lashley, where I'm almost getting the feeling like, even if he did take the belt off Drew, would it be the worst thing in the world? Like, I don't think they will, nor do I think they should, but in such a short amount of time, they've been able to build Lashley as a legit threat to Drew, who, on a side note, how they've built Drew is one of the best things they've done in the past few years. So seeing how well they've done with Lashley is a true testament to that. But, you know, just the fact that they've made him bring back such an old school finisher in the full Nelson, you know, kind of like how they did with Chris Masters all those years ago. I just think that if they do what they've been doing with the Lashley in this short amount of time and they stretch it out for the whole summer, they could really have something special with Lashley as a top main event heel.
I think that they hopefully view this the same way. The evidence for that would be they have given Lashley and MVP specifically multiple segments on Raw. They have recently built up Lashley as a monster heel over the last 6 weeks or so. Same with Apollo Crews. They just all of a sudden out of nowhere, they're just, and I said this before, but it seems like it's an internal Black History Month for WWE where they just decided to push all their African American stars, and I'm fine with it. It's just kind of coincidental. But with Bobby Lashley, would it be the worst thing in the world if he beat Drew McIntyre? I never even considered that. I think the answer is no. I wouldn't be totally outraged. I really wouldn't. I would be shocked. I would be surprised because Bobby Lashley hasn't even sniffed a world title shot in his entire WWE career. But I wouldn't be outraged because he's certainly deserving of the opportunity, and he looks the part. He's got a mouthpiece, so he doesn't have to worry about promos. And his in-ring skills are certainly more than adequate. And so he has all the pieces there. And I think he could be set up for a championship win sometime in 2020. I don't think it'll come at Backlash, but I think that it'll be sometime in 2020 he could be positioned as a true threat to a championship and maybe go on a championship run. As you said, if they end up going all the way to SummerSlam, hey, I'm all for it. As you said, though, Brock Lesnar's on his yearly hibernation, sitting, in somewhere in Montana or wherever the hell he is on a farm, probably not even thinking about Monday Night Raw. But when he returns, which will probably be within the next month to promote SummerSlam, does he get himself involved in this rivalry? Maybe it's a triple threat. WWE loves their multi-man matches. I could see a triple threat for the WWE Championship. That, to me, would be the bigger main event. And I'm not a fan of triple threats per se, but seeing this triple threat, I don't know. I would be interested to see how that would work out. And seeing the stare down between Lashley and Lesnar would certainly be another side story. It wouldn't be one-on-one yet, but you'd get a taste of it. So, man, I think you're onto something.
Well, it's because it's not often, well, for me, that I automatically get behind someone in a main event role when they've been so long defined as a mid-card guy. And I found that as soon as they started to dip their toe in the water with Drew, I was just like, this is going to work. And it works as a baby face, not as a heel. And with Lashley, it was almost the opposite. And he's always had the look, and they've always, like I just mentioned, they've always tested it, but they never completely went for it. And now it seems almost just out of necessity, just because of how much they lack in the star power department, that they're doing it with Lashley. But I think they really could. And it's even if he did win the title off of Drew, like, I think Drew should get it back. Like, it's been a long time since we've seen a rivalry where they trade the championship once or twice, which I don't always think is the best thing, but I also think there's something to be said of a true rivalry, of each of them getting the best of each other one time each or whatnot. Like, it seems like nowadays when someone loses, unless your name is Brock Lesnar, of course, but unless you're Brock Lesnar, you lose the championship and then you go on your merry way. We saw it when AJ lost the title to Daniel Bryan. We saw it when Daniel Bryan lost the title to Kofi Kingston. We saw when Kofi Kingston lost the title to Brock Lesnar. You know, Seth Rollins lost it to Bray Wyatt. Then Bray Wyatt lost it to Goldberg. Like, it's just this kind of a chain that unless you're Brock Lesnar, once you lose the world title, whether it be Universal or WWE, you just say, okay, well, that was fun. I'll just go back to doing nothing now and won't worry about getting it back. But with the chemistry these two have, and I don't know, maybe it's a visual chemistry because, like, they're just such big, overbearing guys who are good in the ring as well. Like, would it be the worst case if, let's say, the first match was a false finish, then their second match, Bobby Lashley won the title, and then Drew got it back at SummerSlam, and then Brock came back into the equation? Like, there's a lot of ways they could go with this and maybe think outside the box to the way they've been doing things for the last number of years. And I just think that this is a particular rivalry based on just how well they've done with Lashley in the past few weeks that they could really capitalize on with several world title matches and potentially maybe some title changes.
They need to capitalize on it, and I think they will. I think you and I are on the same page right now as far as support of Lashley, and there are many ways that they could go with this, but I will be severely disappointed if it's just another sacrificial lamb that WWE created to serve up to Drew McIntyre. And as much as I love Drew as champion, you love Drew as champion, I think they would be doing themselves a huge disservice in the long run for just lining up stars to just have Drew McIntyre eat. We need to feel like his title's in jeopardy. Drew's an absolute monster. Drew looks the part, he feels the part. I have no regrets about him being champion at WrestleMania. None of that. I think that they did the right thing. I still believe they did the right thing. But at some point, you have to create somebody that feels like they're a true threat to take away that championship so the fans can get emotionally invested instead of just looking at this as, Drew's just going to run him over. I don't want to feel that way with Drew. As much as I love Drew as champion, it's not as fun to watch a match that you know he's just going to plow over, like on Monday Night Raw when he faced MVP. Granted, it's not for the championship, but those matches they're okay once in a while. But I like to see Drew in some peril. I want to see him in distress. I want to feel like it's possible that Lashley could take his championship. And right now I don't feel that way, but rightfully so. I don't think I'm supposed to feel that way because of how many years they've defined Bobby Lashley as just kind of this mid-card guy. That's been his place. That's been his role. That's been his ceiling, so to speak. And now he's busted through that, and he's at the level he's never been at. And we don't know how good they're going to be together. We've never seen Bobby Lashley versus, at least in my short-term memory, I don't recall a one-on-one Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre matchup. So I don't know, and we don't know how good they're going to be together. But given the history of experience between the two, over 20-plus years between both of them, I think that it's going to be a good to very good match. I have no concerns necessarily about the quality of the match, given that they are just two guys with two professionals, two pros in the ring that I think will have no problem in terms of match quality. And so, any final thoughts on the Lashley deal?
No, just to say that I like what they're doing with Lashley and Drew in the main event picture. I really like what they've done with Seth Rollins, and he's just incredible right now and kind of steering his way through the upper mid card with Aleister Black and his disciples. Kevin Owens back on the scene in the mid card. I liked his match with Apollo Crews that kind of went up against Seth Rollins later on. But honestly, like, for the most part, I feel like Raw has been really good over the last several weeks, given what they've done with navigating around all the circumstances. I think the mid card is doing very well with Seth and the aforementioned guys. The main event feud is really good, and save for the tag team division, which is an absolute debacle on Raw right now, there's really not a whole lot of negatives I can say about it.
Yeah, no doubt that the Raw Tag Team titles are being completely devalued by the just absolute garbage story that Vince is putting them in because he doesn't know what to do with them. He looks at them and sees comedy. And that's what he did with Otis. He looks at Otis and sees comedy. And it's like, no. Whenever he gets just a sniff of guys that could potentially be funny, he goes, oh, no, we're not putting you in the ring this week. You're gonna do a vignette. I mean, like, that's what he thinks. I mean, it's just poor judgment with Vince right now doing these kinds of things, and so that is the one negative. But outside of that, I mean, like I said, I cannot complain about Monday Night Raw by and large. Are there some things that don't make sense to me or are just outright silly or stupid? Sure, but that comes with any time ever. I mean, even during the Golden Attitude Era, there were some things that you're not going to like. It's very rare or almost impossible to absolutely love everything going on. It's just not going to happen. And that's just the nature of the business. But overall, by and large, I'm loving the product beyond, and I've ranted about this many, many times over the last week or two. So I'm not going to rant about it again, but I wanted your take quickly, and then we can wrap things up, on how do you feel about WWE predispositioning the Randy Orton versus Edge match as the greatest wrestling match ever?
I find it really stupid that we have to make a big deal out of a wrestling match. I think that's my only real thought about it is just like, why are we making such a big deal on the fact that Randy Orton said the word wrestling, that they're going to have a non-gimmick match, and the greatest match of all time? Like, it just seems so forced. It just seems contrived. It seems like just all like fake. It makes me not want to watch the match just out of spite, which I don't like to do, and I don't want to cut off my nose to spite my face, but I just don't like the fact that we've gotten to a point in wrestling that saying the word wrestling and having a wrestling match is like this big, odd deal. Like, oh my God, they're actually going to wrestle each other? Like, they're not going to just have promos or have a gimmicky match. Like, they're just going to wrestle, and that's supposed to be a big deal to me. Like, come on. Like, it just feels like, don't insult my intelligence. Like, it's going to be an excellent match. It may even be the best match on the card. Hell, maybe even be the best match of the year. The greatest wrestling match of all time. And giving that, and like, not even just making it the slogan for the match. They made it the slogan for the pay-per-view, I think. Like, yep. Just the whole aura around that match and the slogan just seems, it's just stupid to me. Like, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't know whose idea it was, but maybe it's just gone to a point with WWE executives that they're sports entertainment. So when they have a wrestling match, it's a big deal. Like how Hell in a Cell used to be a big deal. I'm not really sure, but I don't want to speak for things that go on behind the scenes that I don't know about, but maybe that's what's going on. But to me, it's just like, oh, they're having a singles match, which is a wrestling match, but isn't that everything in WWE wrestling matches? Like, I don't really get it.
Well, I think Vince is allergic to the word wrestling. We all know that. And he's probably said, if you're going to say wrestling, we can't just say it's a wrestling match. We got to make it the greatest one ever. I mean, so he's basically saying you can say it's a wrestling match, but with stipulations and strings attached, that it's going to be the greatest ever. So no matter what you think about wrestling, and we aren't wrestling, but it's going to be the greatest one ever, so you're going to want to tune in. Like, and again, for people that are listening, I really am not going to go into my whole spiel about why this is on so many, like seriously, so many levels, why this is the worst marketing I've ever seen, the marketing slogan, marketing campaign that I've ever seen for a match ever. I really don't want to get into it, and I'm really resisting myself to. But to tell us ahead of time that it's going to be the greatest wrestling match ever is the worst thing that you can do for any match, because you're putting it at an infinitely impossible bar to get to. So you're automatically going to be disappointed off the top. It's a subjective thing to begin with, and a great wrestling match doesn't happen until it's already happened. You can't tell me it's going to be the greatest wrestling match ahead of time and expect me to go, yeah, well, you've told me it's going to be the greatest wrestling match ever, but at the same time, these guys are trying to win the match, so shouldn't they be concerned about winning the match instead of putting on a great match? Like, they're not, I'm supposed to believe they're fighting one another, not worried about making sure they have a 5-star match. So you're killing this on so many levels. It's seriously shameful. Like, whoever came up with this, I said this yesterday, they should be ashamed that this came up and was approved. This is seriously shameful on so many levels. I mean, I'm going to go down a hole. I got to stop.
Well, and again, are you insulting my intelligence by saying that the greatest wrestling match ever will be held at a non-title match at Backlash in June? Like, I'm sorry, but like, I don't want to kill kayfabe, but we all know it's predetermined outcomes, and I know for a fact that the greatest wrestling match will not be done at this pay-per-view in front of no audience. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to kill kayfabe, but don't do things that make me do it, if you know what I mean. Like, don't make me like realize that it's fake, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know if I'm articulating myself properly. Yep. But it's the same thing of like, Otis winning the Money in the Bank. Like, what? Like, just don't do things that force me to disconnect from the product. Like, if you really wanted to drive home the fact that this was a good match, have Randy Orton say, I'm going to beat you in a wrestling match. Have the match. It probably will be a 5-star match given the two guys in it. And then for the rest of time, you could say, I think that was the best wrestling match ever. Don't say it before the fact. Like, the only way, like, they could kind of save it in my eyes is if it's like a 2-spear thing and Edge wins in 40 seconds and it was kind of a satirical thing this whole time. Maybe then I could be like, okay, you kind of got me. But like, if they're really gonna try and have like a 30-minute marathon match, like kind of going back to, I don't know, HBK and Bret Hart circuit WrestleMania 12, I don't think that it's just going to fall flat. Like you said, you're setting an unnecessarily high bar right off the bat at a non-title match at Backlash in June in front of no audience. Like, it will never even be considered 10 years from now among the best wrestling matches ever. And it's like, and again, like, it wasn't that bad until I saw like an advertisement for the Universal Championship match, which isn't even on Raw, it's on SmackDown. And then beside it, I see the greatest wrestling match of all time. And in my head, I'm just like, oh, this is the slogan for the pay-per-view. Like, this is what it is. Like, and maybe it's also given the fact of what they've done at recent pay-per-views with like the Money in the Bank and the Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse match. Like, I'm kind of scared to think if they're going to have it like on some Olympic mat or something. Like, I don't, God. Like, would it really be that far-fetched now to think?
That's funny you bring that up. Michael last night brought the same thing up, that they and I'm fearful that they're tempted to do that and try to make this some kind of cinematic masterpiece as they view it. That would scare the hell out of me. That would do a massive disservice, because I feel like at WrestleMania I got robbed. I mean, I know Edge got robbed from the crowd reaction. Drew McIntyre got robbed from not having the crowd there to celebrate with him. Certainly, I feel bad for both of those guys, but I wanted more of an in-ring product from Edge and Orton. I really did. I feel like I got robbed from just being a couple of moves in there, and everything, 95% of it was backstage with hitting each other for 45 minutes with inanimate objects. I mean, I feel like I got robbed in that sense. But, I mean, WWE cannot tell me that this is going to be the greatest wrestling match ever when it's put up against, when you say ever, that means ever in the history of WWE, because now you're going back to, is it going to be better than HBK Taker at WrestleMania 25? Yeah, I think not. Is it going to be better than Austin and Rock at WrestleMania 17? Yeah, I don't think so. As you alluded to at WrestleMania 12, Hart versus HBK. Yeah, I don't think so. HBK versus Undertaker at the very first Hell in a Cell match in Bad Blood. Yeah, I don't think so. Like, there are so many instances of like, yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. No way. And there's just no way. As good as those two are, the fact of the matter is it's not going to happen. They're two professionals. I'm sure they'll put on a very good match, but it's seriously shameful and laughable that they would even come up with this. I mean, when Charlie Caruso said it first, I remember when Edge came back and Orton first challenged him, and Charlie Caruso was there in the middle of the ring, inexplicably, and said that if Edge accepts this challenge from Orton, it could very well be the greatest wrestling match ever. I said to myself, did she just go into business for herself trying to just think this was a great thing to say? Or did WWE come up with a marketing slogan that they wanted to tell Charlie Caruso to say? And sure as hell, that's exactly what the case was. Why they need to just have a cute marketing slogan for all these things makes no sense. So they could have left it as is, a straight-up wrestling match, and I would have been sold on that. To me, this detracts from the match. It puts the bar just impossibly high, and I don't know who they're marketing to or who they think they're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of. I mean, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, is that who you're marketing to? When they see that and go, oh, great, I can't wait, and they have no context for any other wrestling match that's ever happened? I mean, I don't know. I mean, this whole thing, I know it's just the marketing of it, but I don't think I've ever been so angry about the marketing of a match.
Yeah, I don't want to rip this apart more than we already have, so I'll stop there, but yeah, it's dumb. That's all I'll say on it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right. Well, anything else maybe on Taboo Tuesday or Cyber Sunday you wanted to touch on, or even the current product?
No, I think we pretty well covered it, and, pretty positive show all in all, so I'm pretty pleased with myself.
No, I hear you. And you know what? I give WWE a lot of passes right now simply because of the environment we're in. At the same time, they're also able to do whatever they want with no consequence other than social media because there's no fans in the arena. So there's also that of like, well, when the parents are away, the kids will play. It's kind of that same way with WWE. They have fans in place, 20 or so that are in the building, but they're not going to boo and cheer against what WWE's wishes are. I mean, I wouldn't either. I mean, it just makes sense. But so WWE can just run roughshod, and honestly, it's a time to experiment for WWE. I'm glad that they're taking new roads. They just crowned a new United States champion that we never thought we would have seen, a month and a half ago. And Lashley, as we mentioned, for 20, 30 minutes, we went on about how excited we are to hopefully see him being built and not just a one-off for Drew McIntyre. So, it really has by and large been a positive show, and that is a good thing. So, before you head out though, is there any other social media that you want to share, and Twitter that I don't have available that you want to share?
Yeah, well, you can find me at ADamarco25 on Twitter, and I hope you're back up and running sooner rather than later.
Every show I say this because I don't have a voice right now on social media. It's freaking killing me. I don't know, and I've said this before, guys. I don't know what happened. I really don't. They didn't tell me. I'm just sitting in a jail cell with no explanation. No one's talking to me, and they just said, you're arrested. And they put me under arrest, didn't read me my rights, and I'm sitting in a holding cell in Twitter jail. I don't know what the heck I did. I filed an appeal, and I haven't heard back. It's been like over 2 weeks now. I'm seriously like dying. So hopefully I get it back up and running soon. Well, anyway, Anthony, thank you for coming on. This was a great show. We will have to have you back on soon, and stay safe.
Yeah, you too, Matt. Talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the WWE Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. so you don't miss a show, or head to WWEpodcast.com. And for all of these shows ad-free, head over to patreon.com/WWE Podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.